But going back to Dragonflight, I think it's worth it. I think Blizzard's definitely on their way to accepting feedback a little bit better. And in fact, we had some Ian Hazzikostas interviews, chat. Shall we check them out? Here we go, boys. Yeah, that's gonna be insane, chat.
Unmute and send it and hope that my scene looks good. It does look good. Excellent. We are here live with Ian. First time we're actually meeting. I don't think we've ever actually spoken before. I know you mentioned in a couple other interviews you had seen some of my videos and talked about it with like the AMZ thing, which was pretty funny.
Yep. Long-time listener, first-time caller. Thank you for giving us the ammunition to make some changes we wanted to make. It's always appreciated.
Okay. All right. Well, okay, they're gonna be mad about that, but that's fine. Okay, but yeah. So I just want to get right into it because we have like a pretty limited amount of time. So the first thing I wanted to talk to you about is actually season 4.
Max
so
limit.
I think first of all the community loves it.
Limited time.
At best, I think it's a great new idea that can revolutionize the end of expansions gameplay. Very worst, honestly, is just objectively better than a super long season 3. So basically, what are some of your thoughts about season 4, and if you've had any time during Dragonflight to think about maybe if it could be brought back or improved upon?
Yeah.
Oh, he's liquid max now. He's not limit.
Those
Oh, I'm out of touch. Sorry.
It's been overall super happy with how it's played out. Definitely, some bumps the first week, especially with scaling issues. We never really used that tech at this scale before, so we had to work out some of the kinks in the system there. But I think we went into this hoping that it would play out largely the way it had, and if it did, that this could become something that we go to in the future at the very end of an expansion. Just kind of in those last few months, everyone knows the next expansion's on the horizon. You finish the story, you finish the current expansion's content. It's just kind of a remix and a chance to revisit kind of the greatest hits of the expansion as a whole. Tuning has been definitely something we've been looking at. I think now that people have more gear, pretty happy with where that's landed. And we definitely heard a lot of feedback, especially the first couple of weeks, from Hall of Fame and cutting edge, but not guilds like your guild. That it felt too much like reprogression, and it's like then we go look at logs and realize look, you guys wiped 5 times then killed the boss. That's not really progression, but I get it, right? It feels like you've already learned this fight, feels like you've already killed the boss, you expect to just go in and win, but we want there to be a little bit of a challenge. So I think overall it's pretty, played out pretty much the way we wanted to.
All right, great, yeah, and some other things that were added during season 4 outside of the actual gameplay element of faded affixes and raids. Were a lot of the like loot acquisition systems. So you had to create a few new unique ones because of the way the raids would be rotating. But I kind of wanted to ask you about them. So Dinar and the upgrade essences from Heroic and Mythic, like I said, I think they're excellent. Is there a chance that we could actually see a truncated version of this in a regular season that would maybe help with loot targeting? So an idea for that is currently someone could do an entire Mythic Sanctum raid every week and never see a Jathis maybe. It obviously would have to be much less, but what could that look like?
I think something like this for sure. I think kind of like the season, the season structure itself, we see this as a time for experimentation, and experiments aren't necessarily going to be carried forward in their exact
amazing
form.
interview. It's amazing.
But the idea of anti-RNG backstops and
I want to hear what he has to say
of security and guarantee that you will eventually get that chase best in slot item you want feels like a useful thing for us to explore. The Dinar system, I think, in terms of how upfront it is and how quickly you're getting some things, that is probably way more accelerated than we would ever do in a regular new season. I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One is
drop chances are AIDS at the moment. Okay, well, how would you guys feel if they added something like FF, where if you do, for example, if you did the raid 10 times, they give you a token each time, and with that 10 token you could buy the item you've been farming for? Would you guys like that, or is that a bad idea, chat? In FF, you get these little books, stuff like that, and you could buy pieces. Yeah, I know. When I did the normal raid, I got to buy my big mace. I think I have it right now too, right? But they were talking about specific loot that they couldn't get until the end. Yeah, I bought this with the normal thing, right? No way, FF, but FF gearing is super easy, right? I think in a game, RNG is a little bit important though. I know this might sound troll as fuck, but when I watch Peo and Guzu, they pop off when they raid, right? and people like to see what kind of loot drops, and there's like a hype built around it. And after doing it for, I know it's kind of messed up, but after doing it for a while and you finally get it, there's that boom excitement. But at the same time, it sucks if you're not getting it after a million times you tried, right? Yeah. He says value and farming loot if you're success and yeah, exactly. I think the RNG is important too, so it's gotta have like a good balance. So that's why I said like maybe like 10 times and they could buy it. Cause in FF, after like 3 weeks or 4 weeks of raid content is dead. Because nobody's gonna watch for loot. There's like no RNG loot in FF. It's pretty equalized and fair. But there's no excitement in loot, in my opinion, in FF.
The 3-week rotation means that you just get fewer shots at getting these items. Also, like psychologically, most of these are items that you already had. Like, while it was relevant, you got your Jathis, you got your Sylvanas daggers, whatever else, and so you're having to re-earn them. I think it would, to some extent, I think more than some extent, I think it would diminish the feeling of chasing after that like real trophy item if just week 3 or week 4 of a brand new tier, maybe even before you like kill the boss that dropped it on a specific difficulty, everyone could just walk in and get their item. But yeah, like ups and downs and being excited about a loot jackpot has value.
Exactly.
But feeling like you could do all the right things but never get it is definitely a bummer. We want to see what we can do about that.
It's exactly what I was talking about.
Yeah, and I think also you're going to kind of have a little bit of that reintegrated into every season going forward as well with like the new Mythic Plus pool, right? Like part of you're doing a bunch of new Mythic Plus dungeons. You're also going to see a bunch of new potentially best in slot or very interesting trinkets and things to try. So you're going to have a lot of more loot to kind of go around.
Exactly.
Okay, so then another thing, that's it about Season 4. I kind of just wanted to talk to you about like current raid accessibility in WoW. So I've heard you speak a lot about, you know, like people always ask about 10 mans and stuff. And I think I actually really agree with like 20 mans in WoW with how many specs there are and how vast and variable the different types of combat styles and also the ways that specs deal with that exists. I think 20 man is excellent. But I think there are a lot of things in the game where maybe the barrier of entry could be questioned at that point. So I think the first one I would want to talk about is actually the Mythic raid lockout currently. So I think this exists where a lot of guilds, let's just say they want to do prototype Pantheon, and they're looking, there's a guild raid. They don't want to cancel the raid. They need 2 people. Well, it's going to be really hard for someone to sign up for that group maybe if they really want loot from Skolex and Vigilant Guardian, and they're like, I don't want to get myself locked into this group's raid if I'm not going to continue or if we don't kill it. Basically, what I'm asking is, do you think maybe the Mythic Lockout is outdated in 2022 and it would maybe help a thriving pug system of more raids being able to happen at the 20-man raid size?
So what I'm hearing is you want to do more splits, Mythic splits, more mount sales.
Now,
all of
this is something that always gets brought up to me, that this would honestly be something I dread about it, but I honestly think a lot of stuff that is a side effect where what we do is more crazy that sounds miserable, I think it could be potentially much better for a lot of other people in the game.
So it could be. So I think when you talk about pugs, for sure, you know, the rigid lockout system for Mythic is inconvenient for pugs, but I think at its core, Mythic raid difficulty isn't really meant for pugs. People will pug it later on in the season for sure, especially on bigger servers. Certainly, you know, in Season 4 like this, where the fights are much better known, the tuning's more forgiving, sure. But it's one of those things where, like, the lockout is an example of a little bit of healthy friction. We talk about, you know, friction that can have social benefits, like, you know, stuff that was removed when we added Raid Finder, Dungeon Finder back in the day. This is one of those examples in that joining a Mythic raid is a little bit of a commitment. And I could argue that there's an upside for pugs as well, which is that, you know, if you're doing a Mythic Nathria pug, kill Shriekwing, and then suddenly, you know, things aren't going great on Altamore, it's a great reason not to bail on that group. It's a great reason to not have a quarter of the group say, "Now these guys don't get it. I'm out. I'm going to find another group," because you're locked for the week. You're together with them.
You have to figure it out. Yeah,
and like that, I think that actually it encourages somewhat stronger social bonds, reliance on others. At the same time, you know, I get it if you just want to jump in and get one boss, but I think the downsides to the overall Mythic ecosystem, if we just removed that lockout and made them flex, would outweigh the upsides. And there's a reason why like normal and heroic are designed to be much more inherently flexible in structure, pug friendly. That's why those work that way. That's why Mythic still works the old way.
Okay, cool. So no plans to change that. And yeah, the split thing,
No.
the split thing would definitely be a very unintended side effect from that. Like the absolute terror of potentially seeing like Scott message and be like, okay, everyone show up tomorrow. We're gonna be boosting Mythic Jailer for like 12 hours. So like, I mean, oh my lord, would that be bad? Okay, so I agree with that. Another thing, just along the lines of accessibility. So in BFA, you guys came out with the Hall of Fame with the whole like Horde versus Alliance thing in that expansion. And it became the trigger for cross-realm being available. So the game has seen multiple additions recently to make the game more accessible, so cross-faction being a major one, and then also with the region-wide auction house. Is there any possibility we could get cross-realm at the beginning or earlier in the season in Dragonflight now that the Hall of Fame is less relevant?
Yeah, I think it's like I don't think we're likely to do it right from the very beginning, though we're moving in that direction. We did it for Sepulchre before the Hall of Fame was full. I think it's likely we're going to repeat that again for Vault going forward. In general, the game as a whole, I think, is moving at tearing down server boundaries. We want to make more and more things cross-server. I think we recognize, 15 years ago, back in Classic, if you log into Classic today, you have the strength of sort of insular, self-contained communities where you're seeing the same people over and over again, and there's a lot of upsides that offset the downsides of some of these restrictions. I think in the modern game, really, server increasingly feels like restrictions without as much upside. And so we are systematically working at chipping away at all of those divisions. It just takes time. So I think when we get to a point where things like potentially cross-server guilds down the line and so forth are on the table, I think fully cross-server raids from the start will be automatic. But for now, we want to while we're working towards it, we want to make sure we're not pulling the rug out from our existing social structures. And so earlier, but not day one.
Okay, great.
Yeah, it doesn't work in retail. I don't know. In Classic, definitely you just know every neighbor. Even in the Classic, like I knew all the Hordes and all the Alliance because we're on the same server and we see them all the time in BGs. It's like the same people. And you become friends with like all of them at the end of the day. But in retail, yeah, I don't see that working because people just zoom around. Retail's so different, man. On retail, you sit in Orbos all day and you don't ever leave. Yeah, retail, I just pop my like H and I just queue and I'm like in arena, right? I never really. It's either I'm spinning around Orbos or I'm in like a queue. I'm not like out there farming stuff. And Classic, farming is like a big part of it too. I think retail just made it a lot more comfier, and I don't think there's anything bad in that. Because back then, if you need an enchant, you gotta do like looking for enchanter mongols, and you gotta spam that shit all day. But now they can just upload a piece of paper on the auction house and you can buy that and put it on, right? So it's like comfort, but it removes the aspect of, communicating with people. Classic died though. I mean, it only died because the content's like over, right? There's nothing to do after you beat the newest raid, I guess you could say. Yeah, human interaction. Yeah, interaction. There was definitely a lot more interaction in Classic WoWs, for sure, dude.
So, and again, just the two more questions basically about raid accessibility. And the main one would be actually talking about something you guys have previously done with cross-faction. I think largely this has been really, really good for the game. Obviously, there's still a few things, like it's a little clunky to invite sometimes.
Clunky, but we love it.
Cross-faction, and then also there's some.
You know what's crazy? I talked about like cross-faction back in Legion, and people were so mad at me saying, no, Horde is Horde, Alliance is Horde. So stupid, dude. Because of those people, it took forever, I think.
It's currently like raid lockouts. Like if you were to race change,
there's so many more PvP happening and more raids happening for sure.
Fine. Now it's perfectly realistic for you to be able to race change to maybe Blood Elf and still raid with your guild, but it will like brick your Mythic lockout. So I think something that can solve this, and something you guys have spoke on before, is basically is there any progress being made to the technical limitation of cross-faction guilds? Is it something maybe mid-expansion or much longer than that, do you think?
There's definitely progress being made. It's something we want to do. it's not really responsible for me to commit to a time frame. I would say I would like us to do it before the next expansion.
Okay.
But it's in the hands of a lot of engineering problem solving, and just, you know, a lot of these
Curious. Hello.
pulling on a thread in, you know.
I'm gonna pause this because there's a lot going on.
Hello, brother.
Hello, brother Furious. Hello, thank you for the 56
Code and systems
month.
have been built to work a certain way for 20 years, and realizing like, hey, this is trickier than we expected. It may be easier than we expected. We'll see. But definitely recognize there's some awkwardness, as, you know, some groups have had people faction change that want to keep raiding together, and not being able to share the same guild chat, the same guild repairs, guild bank, etc., guild achievements gets in the way. A lot of the other stuff you talked about, I think a lot of those are what I would consider bugs. There's a few that we're working on tracking down specifically with cross-faction whispers or invites. If you're in a group with somebody, if you've applied to the group finder group, if you're trying to reply to a message, like, all of that should just work. Anytime it fails to work, that's a bug. Now, but the thing we want to make sure is that, you know, there's some opt-in connection. You're not just getting a whisper from a random, you know, cross-faction person that, you know, ganked you in the outdoor world or whatever. And then also similarly, I think faction change, that's just something we need to change.
You're
like
fine,
the fact that it stomps your lockout is a vestige of how the system was built, when of course two people of opposite factions couldn't be in the same raid in the same lockout. We just nuked your old one to avoid that collision. We shouldn't be doing that now, but again, that's an example of an old system that needs to be updated.
Sweet. Okay. All right. So this is a big one, and this is again, I've heard your philosophy on this multiple times. The WoW has gone through a very long history of going back and forth between bring the player or the class. So last expansion, playing perfectly optimally, there was about 7 spots in a 20-man raid that were basically required with something that you could not really replace with any other class. This expansion so far, again, taking a few liberties, but even leaving a few out, there's a bit closer to 12. Speaking for a not world first or high level cutting edge team who will probably make it work regardless, but more for the 10 to 15 man AOTC level teams that might not have some very powerful buffs, or might have to swap classes and like play something they maybe don't like as much to make themselves more powerful. I understand a lot of people don't need to be fully optimal, but yeah. Basically, can you explain your philosophy around raid buffs and how it's differed from X-Back to X-Back, where some classes were not required and now might be?
Yeah, so okay. Let's see this. Let me make sure I have.
That was a
all
long
of that
question.
straight.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, okay. So like, I guess, I mean, so some of it is stuff you've mentioned that I've talked about in the past, but I think the origins of bring the player, not the class, were like the extreme other end of the spectrum back in late Burning Crusade, where it wasn't just raid buffs, it was a matrix of party buffs. And it was, you know, as people saw in BC raiding, well, you know, you need a rogue in the group with a warrior to give battle shout, the warrior needs Wind Fury or they're bad, and sometimes you'd have somebody who's a good player, plays a class that's theoretically good, but you don't have room for them in your specific raid party matrix, and so they can't contribute. That felt clearly not what we wanted. And we moved away from that steadily. But I think where we're moving back towards is class mattering, making sure that the best raid composition, if you want to be optimal, is one that has representation of all 12, soon to be all 13 classes. And that's, you know, 20-player Mythic raid format supports that. I think that's something that is friendly for pugs as well in a flex raid setting. Like if you're a pug leader, you're trying to recruit the optimal group, get a group together. If you don't have a warlock, you should be looking for a warlock. If you don't have a hunter, you should be looking for a hunter, as opposed to which is the meta range spec, this tier,
Warlocks
let me
are
just bring
so
5
good,
of them
man.
and we're good to go. That helps provide social opportunities for the full range of players. Now, that said, we want to make sure that none of these buffs feels too impactful to the point that it's like, you can't go without it. It's utterly mandatory at multiple levels of play, not just, you know, the top tier level. In that case, we want to look at things like tuning. We want to look at things like alternate buff items that can provide a substitute, or just increasing availability. I think the 2 most classic ones in this space are, you know, Bloodlust, Battle Res. I think no group at almost any level is going to go without them. The percentage of classes that brings those buffs has decreased naturally over the years. That's something we're looking at changing. So a little scoop for you. I think you'll probably see this in the next beta build, or next alpha build rather. Evokers will bring Bloodlust. So we'll have a 4th Lust class in the mix. We're also looking at adding Battle Res to 1 more class. Possibly Paladins, likely Paladins, but don't like 100% quote me on that.
Okay.
Yep. And then for the rest, like we want
Oh,
to take a step back and look at the whole
B-res.
ecosystem now that we've explored the space of
That's
individual
awesome for
buffs
PvE for
on the
sure.
class level. We don't want to.
Yo, hello for the people that are joining now. What's up? What's up? Just reacting to this interview with Ian Hazzikostas on Dragonflight. Listening to some interesting stuff. I'm actually like intrigued. I'm enjoying this conversation.
Close that door and say, no, we're not doing this. But it's absolutely possible that when you take all 38 specs in their totality, there's just too much of this now, and we're too
Yeah,
close
it
to the
doesn't
Burning
help in
Crusade space.
PvP mode.
At which point, over the next month, we'll want to pull back on some of those.
Okay.
But yeah.
All right. Yeah. So actually, I will have a follow-up question on that because that was actually, first of all, that was an amazing answer. Thank you for that. But so when you talk about like a scenario where, okay, if you are trying to play optimally, you maybe will want to have one of every spec.
Yo, Ian's actually answering all these questions pretty well, chat. He's doing a good job. I feel like he's pretty connected. He's doing well, man.
I think there's a couple of polarizing versions of raid utility right now that I kind of want to hear your opinion on. So currently, I think of the, how many classes are there now? Is it 13 with evokers?
Yep.
Okay.
Pretty
With 13
similar
classes,
question.
I think 10
you think
have
is it
ones where
actually?
they have either an hour-long raid
They're
buff that is basically
paid
irreplaceable, or are in some way bringing them to raid. Like for example, warlocks don't have them, but if you've been around gateways,
Shit,
hellstones,
man. I was gonna say
summons,
he's
wipe
really
recovery,
good
all
at
those things are
answering
extremely
these.
powerful, and you need one of those classes. How do you look at abilities like DK's Death Grip, where it's not a class you need to have in the raid every pull, but if there is a raid boss or a dungeon or something that requires grips, that is as important or more important than that. So how do you balance between classes that just have a button that puts them in the raid versus classes that have such strong situational utility where they're needed immensely for small things but not for every boss?
So you're asking us to nerf Death Grip, in other words. No.
That's the opposite of what I'm saying.
No, I know.
Yeah.
Honestly, carefully. Like needed is the thing that shouldn't be something that we're building in encounters, certainly on non-mythic difficulties. Like if having knockbacks, having Death Grip, having a certain tool makes your life a bit easier in normal and heroic, great. And again, like pug leaders, especially, like pug leaders are encouraged to, it's flex raid for a reason. Look for a Death Knight. There's a ton out there who are actively looking for groups. Get one in, it'll help you. Philosophically, like we talk about normal versus heroic, I think part of the difference there, like a normal group, normal mode is pugs, but also just really casual friends and family groups that are just there to play with each other. They're not looking to bring strangers into their group. They're not necessarily looking to like recruit to get a certain class or re-roll. We want to make sure that at that difficulty, you can succeed regardless. You can succeed with a very suboptimal comp as long as you have the basics covered. At heroic level, like to some extent, the difference there, even if you're not like cutting edge mythic, there's some challenge, there's some coordination, you care about success. You're not going to bring along a person who's doing 50% less damage than everybody else if you're failing to meet a DPS check. And so in that space, bringing in classes that can help you is useful. If it's ever literally impossible, then we're going to probably make mechanical changes to the encounter. We're going to give you more time. We're going to, make a cast interruptible. We'll do something there. So it's like it's not just ridiculously punishing if you don't have that specific class. Honestly, though, like things like Death Grip, we would like more of those because it's so cool. Because it's more than just 5% damage or whatever passive buff. It lets you shape your strategy, and I think lets the player who is the Death Knight, even though they may resent having to run out and do some utility at the expense of their parse here or there, it lets them feel like they have a special role that's contributing to their group's success.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with that. Also, just because chat's definitely like these DKs are wild, but yeah, I was more kind of along the lines of like implying like I think it's hunters, DKs, and shamans, I believe, that are the only class in the game basically that has situational fight utility instead of just they have something that makes them in all the time. So I was kind of just saying like maybe if you did actually want where like, okay, you will always have at least one of these. So you have 7 spots now to fill with just what you want. If you're being optimal, obviously you don't have to be, if you're being optimal, and then you have that. But currently I think it's only, you're kind of trending in this direction. So maybe we haven't seen the full vision of it, but like there is still, I think like 2 or 3 classes that don't have something that puts them in the raid all the time.
Yeah, I think how he starts jumping while Max
ultimately, we are looking at representation.
Maybe he's standing up. I think he's on a standing desk, chat. No, if I stand up, I like bounce around like that too, chat.
Across, just what the actual stats are. We want to have a good something we feel is a good idea, something that's elegant, that's not, it's easy to say, okay, this class has nothing, they get some new passive 3% stat buff, now everyone has to bring them. But that feels like a cop-out. So it's like, if there's a representation problem that we need to solve and we're coming up with a good idea, we want to move in that general direction, but not at the expense of elegant design.
Excellent. And actually, this actually isn't even a question. I just wanted to
not
bring
on
something
the
up
perk.
on the note of like bringing classes to raids and make sure it's accessible. Along something that's often forgot about when talking about the DK thing we talked about at the beginning of this interview, where it was the video you were watching was not about DKs. It was about melee representation in raids. And I want to say, since that video, you guys have actually done a very good job at that. This expansion so far, Sanctum and Sepulcher, as opposed to like the normal comp, you've been able to stack basically as much melee in both of those raids on every boss as much as possible, and that has not happened before previously in WoW. So whatever adjustments you guys made there, it didn't actually trivialize melee, which was my fear for it, and it did make them more accessible. So just thank you for that.
Cool. Thank you. And yeah, kudos to the encounter team. Really, I mean, it's something we talked about as an active goal. Like, how can we get ideal raid representation and melee versus range balance better representing our actual class mix, and do that without, like you said, just making the fights patchwork for melee? Because that was the traditional way back in the day of like, all right, these mechanics just don't target melee. Cool, they can just stand there and punch the boss for 5 minutes, but that's not a good experience for them either.
Yeah. And then just one more last thing before we move on to Mythic Plus. So you did mention something about, if you need to, you would potentially add them back, but just to specifically...
He's looking all direction. It's because, okay, he has like notes he's reading off here onto the next question, and he's looking at the camera. That's what it is, chat. It's like me when I look at chat and you guys, okay? Chat, pay attention to the goddamn interview. Not Ian Hazzikostas like jumping around. Freaking Malishar is sending me like off the perk when one is acting in an erratic manner that may be form the lack of an addictive substance. Oh, you think he's a crackhead? Bro, he's not a crackhead, man. Oh my.
So if you feel like it's hard enough to get certain things in the game, you guys are not opposed to potentially bringing back the scrolls that existed in BFA, or potentially maybe not buffing Lust Drums back to what they are, because you just added another class that brings it, right?
He is moving a lot, though, to be fair. Look at the dog,
I think
dude.
We're open to it. I think part of the challenge there is also, when you think about where the scrolls are used, they're not just a raid consumable. They become, a mandatory consumable for every dungeon situation, where by definition you're not going to have class representation because you can't. And then it also starts to turn into like, well, wait, so the thing that I bring as a warrior, as a druid, whatever, is like a 2% better version of this buff, where people don't have to spend gold on a consumable. Like, that just makes their contribution feel less cool. So ideally we would want to find a middle ground, whether maybe that's reducing the baseline power or otherwise tuning, so that it just still feels like, cool, we have this class, this is a benefit that we have, and the difference between having it and not isn't something that you can't overcome otherwise.
Okay. And just one more note that it just popped up to me. This expansion in Shadowlands, as opposed to before, you actually you have consumables you use at like the beginning of a dungeon or beginning of a raid fight that is actually in a much higher number than you did previously. So you have like the armor kits, you have the sharpening stones, the oils, that kind of stuff. Do you guys see that continuing into Dragonflight?
That's a good question. I think we've probably gone a bit too far there. And I think as we're nailing down, just finalizing.
Sorry, well, what did he say, chat? I just had some fried person messaging me. Sorry. Mod was like, Mod wasn't fried at all.
Questions
for
Dragonflight. Want to take a step back and see what the sum total of that experience is. I think a lot of those examples that you gave were things that we did to make blacksmiths and leatherworkers, frankly, feel more relevant. Feel like they had something that
consumables for raids and stuff.
Templates they could sell.
So many are necessary. Gotcha.
Dragonflight is solving that problem on 5 other levels. So a world where you need to apply 5 or 6 things, it makes each one of them less meaningful, and also just the general economic burden of like doing runs, doing the content probably gets to be higher than we want it to be.
Okay. So that's it for Raid. I just have a few more questions about Mythic Plus.
Sure.
So the Mythic Plus system in Dragonflight, kind of getting a sneak peek of it in Season 4. So I think it'll actually, probably be a lot better now that you've had a run at retuning some old raids, which has been really nice. The only thing that I could kind of think of as a potential downside is that what happens if, in season 1, you run into one of your new Dragonflight dungeons that is just extremely good. It is like the key that people want to run, not because it's easy to time. It's just like this key is so very fun. You can think of many. A lot of people have different opinions of these, but like what that would be. It may sadden Mythic Plus players that they have an amazing dungeon and they don't get to play it for a long time. So basically, what I'm asking is, what's the balance of good versus new? And if anything, you might not be able to speak on this because it's kind of in the future, but like, do you have any plans for season 3 or 4 of Mythic Plus? Is at that point you've kind
You
of
might not be
shown
able to
what
look at
you're
it. He's looking at his notes like, I have my answer written down. What the heck? I thought this was organic, chat. I mean, that's fine. He's answering pretty well, so.
1 and 2, right? You'll have 4 Dragonflight and 4 returning, maybe to bring back some old favorites.
Yes, I think we definitely have room to revisit, maybe tweak or update, or just revisit as they were if everyone loves them, a dungeon later on in the season. I think season 2 is almost certainly going to be the other 4 Dragonflight dungeons plus 4 other legacy ones. But beyond that, I think one thing the structure does is also gives more room for us to potentially add all new dungeons over the course of an expansion. Something we would like to get back to doing more of. I think back in Legion, when we last did this, one of the quick challenges that we ran into was integrating a brand new dungeon into a pool of dungeons that the community had already mastered.
Mm-hmm.
Like when Cathedral Mythic Plus rolled out.
Oh, this is such a good point.
That was a super dead key for a long time, even more so with Seat of the Triumvirate.
Yeah.
Yep. And like, it wasn't actually like the challenges. It wasn't they were, in some cases they were actually harder, but like beyond that, it wasn't that they were that much harder. It's that you were comparing a dungeon the community had 1 week of knowledge of to a dungeon they had been running, for over a year, but treating them equally in terms of rewards, in terms of what challenge they were supposed to offer. When we have all new pools, that's not an issue anymore. So I think as we look towards the later seasons, if there's new dungeons introduced, that actually naturally goes there. We definitely can revisit any favorites from the first 8 while continuing to rotate through cool legacy dungeons.
Excellent. That is a perfect answer. And then also just a question about
shit, how many
gear.
dogs
So
you
this
got?
gets brought up a lot, but I just kind of want to maybe phrase it in a little bit different way. So with Mythic Plus becoming more of an endgame avenue for people, is there a potential to add higher level loot acquisition for people who are doing top world level keys specifically? So like obviously raiding and PvP both get functionally higher eye level, but a lot of people exclusively Mythic Plus. Basically, is there a Mythic Plus key level that exists where it is kind of the same thing as killing maybe the last 2 bosses on Mythic, even though obviously you don't have to find 20 people to raid with, and then one is spammable for loot, and one of them is a weekly lockout, all of that included. Just have you guys had any more thoughts on that?
I think there is a key level that exists. It's definitely a different key level for Lower Karazhan than Workshop, but that's one of the challenges too. This spammability of it definitely is a factor. That's something we've grappled with when it comes to Mythic Plus loot since its introduction back in Legion. Because of how varied dungeon pools are, because of just the social factors of if someone's running a dungeon on a Saturday, we don't want people feeling like, well, I'm already locked for the week, or I've already maxed out on my loot for the week, so I don't want to run it with you. That's led us to every dungeon run gives you some loot, but of course, balancing that against weekly throttled systems like, just raids and PvP means that if it's too rewarding, we just completely killed raiding. And I would argue that one of the problems for not Mythic guilds so much, but normal and heroic guilds right now, is the tension between raid rewards and Mythic Plus rewards. If you're in a group progressing through heroic over the course of a season, but half of your raid is running 15s outside of raid time, you don't really need that raid loot anymore. And that increasingly causes division within the group, even between the people who are doing Mythic Plus and people who aren't. None of that is great. So anyway, all of that said, the direction I think we'd like to move in, though I don't have specific changes to announce, is on the one hand actually trying to, between tuning and rewards, bring that baseline down a little bit, or at least bring the baseline challenge up a little bit so that there's more of more parity between raid, dungeon, PvP rewards in that space. But at the same time, find ways to let Mythic Plus players reach the top of the mountain. Like whether it's, I don't know, whether there's some level that you clear in your Great Vault that lets you get Mythic end boss quality loot or whatever else. We'd like to make them truly equal in that sense, but there's some problems to solve along the way.
Yeah, definitely. There's also, I think this season kind of showcased what can happen to the heroic raid difficulty by having Mythic Plus available for, like, you uncapped Valor, for example, right? So if you just went hard enough and you farmed literally +2s and enough Valor, like anyone can do them, you can get full 298 gear, and you will not want any single drop out of heroic basically, except for the last boss. So there's a level there of balancing to where like Mythic, yeah, baseline Mythic Plus. Okay, I haven't thought about it like that before. Thank you.
But at the high end, like I think there's absolutely every bit as much skill that goes into pushing really, really high keys. We should be rewarding that equally. We just have to find a way to do it.
Cool. All right. Well, that's actually we blazed through basically all the main stuff I wanted to talk about. I do have a few more questions about like class trees and dragon riding.
Sure.
So with how fun and successful dragon riding, for the few of us who've been able to actually try it yet, hopefully soon a lot more people get it in their hands. It is unbelievable.
The dragon riding is fun, but I feel like there's like a big limitation on it. I wish it was a little bit more free. Let's see what they have to say about
it. Like fully transcends flying. In fact, it's so good that I feel like just flying normally just feels bad because of how good the system is. Are there any thoughts or plans in the future to allow dragon riding in the open world, potentially some race content in old zones, stuff like that?
That's certainly one of those things we started talking about pretty quickly once initial alpha impressions came in. I mean, I think we built the system focused on Dragon Isles so that we really didn't have as many of the guardrails in designing it that we might have had if we were building it from day one as an evergreen game-wide system. A challenge here is also, not the specific mounts, the dragon ride we built to support dragon riding. We want to be very mindful of preserving players' investment and just the usefulness of the hundreds of mounts that many people have collected that they've spent years farming up. If suddenly those mounts are consigned to the dust heap because they can't do all the cool dragon riding stuff, that feels like a problem. All that said, when we introduce any one of these features, our hope is that it's awesome enough that people don't want to say goodbye to it, that we want to carry it forward, for the rest of the game's future. And so far, this is looking to be landing in that space. So we're very happy about that. Recognize that when Dragonflight is behind us, when we're leaving the Dragon Isles, people are not going to feel great about going back to their old, just, floating at a static speed through the sky mounts. And so we want to have a solution when we get there.
All right, cool.
That would be cool. What do you mean I'm pretending like I'm knowing what they're saying? I know exactly what they're saying. I had this talk with Aunt Bonnie in the mount video, but I think Clack cut it out. It'll be really cool to see all our mount do what Dragonflight mounts can do, but that requires the devs to add in animations for all the mounts, each and one of them, right? And I don't know if they could do that. It'll be a lot. I mean, that'd be awesome if they do. Imagine me flying on this bad boy, same as they do in Dragonflight. Because the Dragonflight mounts, you can't ride it in Azeroth. You can only ride that in I guess it's Azeroth. I mean, outside of Dragonflight, the zones. On Alpha, if I get on my Dragonflight mount, you can't ride it in the normal place. You can only ride it in Dragonflight. There's limitations in both. Yeah. But it'll be cool if they add in animations for every mouse that could fly like that. That'll be freaking amazing, dude.
Let's see, I have two other ones. I'm trying to kind of combine them. Maybe
I'm not pretending. What are you guys on about?
So far the class trees have been excellent. The best ones give you things you haven't had before. They give you choice. Being able, maybe not even adding things you're getting, but necessarily just dropping things you don't maybe need for a specific encounter to give you a passive or another thing that will make you more powerful in what you're doing. This has been achieved through most of the specs in the game, but the feedback has been a little varied. So we've had, some specs get feedback every Friday for this entire patch so far with great changes. There's been other classes that didn't have posts for a month, but then just got this massive dump of information that was clearly being worked on the whole time. With excellent changes. Speaking about
Chad, Reds are being worked on right now. It's gonna be an excellent change. Red Paladins getting the biggest, baddest mobility buff. Oh my god, it's coming, chat. You hear here first, man.
BK specifically, and then some other classes have had less updates. Basically, just asking can there be a more standardized level of feedback between all the classes, and how has that been going for you
Yeah, druids and priests, we hear you. We're
And
gonna
what
have
about the paladin,
information
man?
soon. Apologies for the silence. I know, you deserve better and you rightly expect better.
What?
Ideally,
on,
yes,
dude.
we would have had, just more even-handed communication across the board. The challenge is it's, I know billion-dollar company and all, but at the end of the day, it's also
He knows the meme. Billion-dollar company, by the way. He knows the meme, man.
number of humans who can all just fit in one room together who are handling both the class design side of it and the community communication side of it. And life happens that results in, gaps along the way. Sometimes one developer is working on a couple of classes and has one done, but they need to get the other one done because understandably players of that class are impatient, but that means in turn that they're less focused on the first one for now and are going to get back to it.
Okay,
And
take your time.
It's stuff
Just-
like that.
Yeah.
I know
understand.
sometimes it can be helpful just to hear from us that, we don't have anything right now. We're working on it. We're going to have news for you in a couple of weeks, as opposed to just radio silence. And I think we all need to collectively work to get better at ever having the radio silence situation going on when people are just waiting for news.
Excellent. Okay, and I think I have time for one more question. So first of all, that's excellent. And I don't even know if I need to end it with a question. The question isn't even that good. I just want to point out that you guys have the right idea with class trees. The ones being done at their best, and you've seen over time, the ones that were a bit more problematic have obviously been a deep amount of collaboration there, and they have seen the things that have worked in other trees and moved on to others. So far, I think the fact that some of them at their very best show an unbelievable form of content, I think all of us are just really happy to see it, and just hope that all the classes kind of end up turning around with the same, because I know it's going to be a long road, right? Because you're just now, it seems, with posts, you're getting into the tuning section, right? Where like now that you've added a bunch of new capstones, you're going to need to make sure that they all kind of make sense. Some of them weren't capstone nodes before. They need to really compete with each other. So you guys ready to just talk about that process?
Yeah, tuning and iteration.
I'll take a look at
And
this
that's
after
going to
this.
mean replacing some
I
talents,
think this is the
redesigning
last question, right?
some things that just aren't working. But we obviously needed to get the broad foundations out there. Looking forward to raid testing, Mythic Plus, Endgame, seeing people actually using these builds in different situations, and moving beyond theory crafting to playing with them. And that's the only thing that's ahead of us. And frankly, that's actually a little bit of a relief. Like at this point in Shadowlands, we still had 4 different systems to implement. It was like, cool, we got these things done. Now let's finish making conduits and Torghast powers. Here, okay, we have our first pass of the talent trees done. 100% of the team's time is going to be focused on listening, responding, iterating, and then tuning.
All right, excellent. Thank you.
Listening, responding. Okay, I think I need to do what MBQ said. MBQ said he wrote like a forum post. I think I need to like gather all my data, like stack it on a paper, write something really nice, and I'll make a video on it too. I gotta put in a lot of time into this, but that's the last shot, dude. Last shot, Chad. We can do this.
Thank you so much for your time.
I have one super quick question for you. Just wanted to seed this as a question for you, for the community.
Okay.
How do you guys feel about simultaneous normal, heroic, mythic release as a thing in, let's say, hypothetical future tiers?
I think, for me personally, okay, so I haven't had any time to think about this, but something that I think is an issue is like one thing you guys have done some things to mitigate in the past is you've like had to reduce what crazy things we would do during heroic when like Mythic first comes out. But the reality is that's because we have an entire week to do degenerate things. If Mythic is out, that really solves a lot of the decision making. You'd be doing a lot of things when Mythic is out, but I mean, that is a massive source of information. I don't know. That's very overwhelming. I would need to figure that out.
Yeah,
but
no.
Chat
and to
is
be clear, I'm super not, and I'm not genuinely not announcing anything there.
Yeah.
We're just trying to figure out, I mean, there's holidays coming up, there's stuff going on. We want to think through how our raid rollout is going to work for the start of Dragonflight, and community feedback always helps.
I think it'd be, I'm not positive, but I think it would be worth a shot, especially with, like the potential timing. So I think I'm just so much at once, but I'm almost positive that it's a good thing, but I would need to like actually sit down and actually think about it. So thank you for that. That was very cool. And thank you so much for the answers. That was deeply insightful.
Yeah, holiday rating is bad.
Wow. I'm very passionate about it, and very clearly you are too. So thank you for that.
It's a pleasure. Yeah, thank you very much, and look forward to doing it again.
All right, thanks, man. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Yep.
You're a good interview, Mr. Maximum.
All right. There
Round
we
of
go,
applause, chat.
That went really well, I think.
That did go well. What classes have been iterated on or receive feedback? How much Blizzard loves. I mean, what is this off of, right? What is this off of? Is there even a DPS meteor in I'll need to like do some dungeons and test out some damage. This is all consecration damage, by the way. Insane, chat. What do you think? I think his answers were valid and genuine. What he said was not wrong. Everything sounded good. Like I said, a lot of you guys spam cope, but I think this expansion has a little bit more potential than the old one. Listen, Blizzard had a lot of fuck ups last year. They had the scandal. They went downhills. Everyone was quitting. Everyone went to play FF. But they, you know, FF wasn't that poggers. And we play Lost Ark. Blizzard lost a lot, but I think they want to start winning again. They want to start winning again. So they're really going to take the feedback and listen. They're doing better for sure. They're doing better for sure. No? You guys don't agree? I mean, we'll find out, okay?